Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast. Today we'll be reviewing two more recent releases. A little later, we'll be talking about the Indian film, All We Imagine Is Light. But first, we're going to be talking about Nicole Kidman's latest movie, Babygirl. A high-powered CEO puts her career and family on the line when she begins a torrid affair with her much younger intern. This is the next film directed by Helena Rijn, who is a Dutch filmmaker. And we've only seen one other film from her, which was another A24 movie, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. We reviewed that previously on the podcast. What do you remember? How do you feel about Bodies, Bodies, Bodies now removed? I think maybe like a year and a half, 2 years from it.
I still think it's a good film.
Mm-hmm.
I think it delivered in the premise compared to a lot of films that were targeted towards like the Gen Z group, because I think we saw a lot of films that were like supposed to be horror films that dealt with like text messaging, social media, or the commentary on that, and they always fell flat.
Well, they had no satirical edge, and Bodies, Bodies, Bodies understood this is silly and kind of embraced that it was silly, yet at the same time still managed to make like people actually die in it.
Yeah, it was actually like also the conversations at times when they were arguing felt a little bit more realistic versus the other stuff that we'd witness.
And that film I think had a really strong cast, which helped.
Yes, I think it delivered better than I feel like that horror film the guy from Euphoria made, which was like trying to also
Assassination Nation.
Yeah, like
or Y2K, which is another, even though it's supposed to be set in millennial era, all of the actors are Gen Z actors.
Yeah, I think it was a little stronger to the point that it wasn't like, oh, it's too gimmicky that it's going to completely go over my head. But there are things that I still found appealing about it.
So now we get to this movie, Babygirl.
Babygirl?
With Nicole Kidman and Harris Dickinson. Antonio Banderas is also in the film. We also got to see Sophie Wilde, who we were first introduced to in the horror film Talk to Me.
Yes.
And interesting to see her in a very different role. I saw she's 26 in real life, so this role feels a lot closer to probably what she is like in real life than an Australian suburban teenager.
Yeah.
So what do we think of Nicole Kidman and this era of her career?
So at first I was kind of not sure how to feel about this film in particular.
Well, I'm talking about Nicole Kidman in general lately.
Yeah. But I'm saying like, because it seems as if she has gone through, this is not me, this is from what I've seen a lot of people talk about within her past choices, is that she's gone for a lot of either series or films where people are like, you're what age? But you're so beautiful.
Yeah.
And in this one, it was more acknowledging of her age and the stuff that she's doing in order to maintain this beauty, which is going to the extremes, right?
Yeah.
Like going to a biofreeze to probably freeze off fat. And like
it was the first time I really felt like I saw Nicole Kidman looking old.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, there's a balance. You can still see the sort of youthful Nicole Kidman in there. It's just, cheeks are a little saggier, bit of bags under the eyes.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's still her. Like you don't.
Yeah. I think it's a hard thing that like when it comes to actresses aging, it's hard not to compare Nicole Kidman to Julianne Moore because they kind of came up around the same time.
Redheads make very interesting acting choices.
Yes. And then Julianne Moore, look, I'm not really surprised when I see her older because it feels like she has allowed herself to do it versus...
She never really tried to hide it.
Yeah, versus we have seen evidence, and Nicole Kidman has talked about Botox, which it's neither here or there. I think it's just like this thing that like women aren't allowed to age on screen the way that men do.
If we're looking at Nicole Kidman's career, let's say from 2020 onward, First movie, The Prom, where she plays real life actress Angie Dickinson. I have no idea what that movie is. I've never heard of that movie.
Yeah.
Then we have her as Lucille Ball in the Aaron Sorkin film Being the Ricardos, which I skipped over because Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, I'm refusing to watch a film about a communist slash socialist written by
a total lib. She played the mother in The Northman. She played the mother in the latest Aquaman movie. She was in a movie called A Family Affair that came out last year that I don't. It's Nicole Kidman, Zac Efron, Joey King, Kathy Bates, and I have no idea about this movie.
that I was seeing on social media people talk about that film, and it's supposed to be like Zac Efron is like surprised that Nicole Kidman is like
In
Joey King's like daughter because he's like but you're so hot.
Okay, well, hot women do have reproductive systems often, so I don't know. Like, okay. And then we have Babygirl. And then there was an animated film called Spellbound that she did a voice for. Now, just going back a little further, I noticed Destroyer on the list, which was a movie I didn't think was a great movie, but I do think Nicole Kidman gave a very interesting performance in that movie.
Yeah.
The character is unlike anything she's ever played. So there's a lot of mothers in that list, and then there are also some interesting acting choices. So then when we come to Babygirl, where do we feel this fits in with the Nicole Kidman filmography? Is this going to be up there as a very memorable performance, or do you think this is just going to kind of be forgotten and people are going to move on?
I think it's towards the edge of memorable and forgettable at the same time.
I think it leans more into a forgettable.
And this is having to do with the fact if you just don't really like absorb the film, view it in different contexts. It's just like it's supposed to be slash erotica slash thriller. And as someone who like watched, for example, a film like The Secretary, there was nothing.
Or you mean it's not The Secretary?
Secretary.
There is no definite article.
Yeah.
The Maggie Gyllenhaal James Spader movie. Yeah.
This one, despite the fact that like I like Babygirl, I like the way that it's acted. The tension doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like she's really gonna lose everything.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah,
I like the look of it. So we're getting to our initial thoughts on the film. I'm on the same page with you. I didn't know where we were going at first. I knew the general premise. And then when like the premise kicked in, it felt a mix of like silly, and then the film kind of like acknowledges the silliness and the awkwardness of it, but then goes in a direction that just completely disinterested me. It felt like I was very confused about what exactly the stakes were in this story for her character.
It's also a bit confusing. I'm not saying that women within Nicole Kidman's ages are not. I think it's just it's a little bit weird to me, like a woman that is at that age who is a CEO.
Who's dealt with a lot of bullshit.
Who in the film it is indicated that she grew up around like cults. And then like,
and that doesn't really get explored.
No,
really.
But then like it's sort of like it's supposed to be like maybe this person who had to make themselves to then be kind of like I don't know what I like sexually. I'm shy about it. It's a little.
There was a lot of the character being written for the convenience of making the plot happen.
Yeah, and
where it's because like you brought up how she talks about being raised in cults. I feel that if you were raised in a cult and you got out of it, you're probably going to be much better at not falling for cultish behavior than someone who wasn't, because you're now have an awareness of the ways in which people recruit and do cults of personality. And she doesn't. The movie implies like, oh, because she was raised in a cult, she's actually more susceptible to cults, which I don't think logically makes sense.
Especially because of like, again, CEO. Like it's not CEO of a cutesy little like.
It's a shipping company, like an Amazon level kind of company.
It's a company that is going to completely completely automated by machines.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like she has this belief that like people do not need to be doing this job, while also just not fully selling it to me, to the point that I'm just like, I think the film was supposed to leave us to a feeling like we don't really know who she is, like outside of the relationships that she has, these intimate relationships. But because you failed to show that to me up until the end, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, this is who she is. And I just kind of don't believe it.
It was a film where I could like feel the writing, and that's a bad sign because when you're
Yeah.
watching a good film, like what do you say is a good film?
I think a good film.
Like name a title.
Oh boy. I mean, we've been doing like Happy Hour, Drive My Car, but this is like one director.
Or I'm gonna say, here's my comfort movie.
Yeah.
Of all movies, Zodiac by David
Yes.
Fincher. That is a movie where I don't feel the writing because through editing and through the way the actors are directed and the choices that they make, what happens is what's on the script melts away and you just become in that world.
Yes.
Everything about this movie felt like they had gone through a screenplay writing book and were plugging things in. For example, her eldest daughter, Isabel, played by Ewan McGregor's daughter, Esther Rose McGregor. Very early on, I'm like, oh, she's the foil to her mother because her mother is cheating on her dad and being involved with someone who I think is supposed to be younger.
Yeah.
Right. And then we have Isabel, who is cheating on her girlfriend with they have like a country house they go to for the holidays. And there's like a neighbor girl who she cheats with. And immediately I'm like, oh, okay. So Nicole Kidman, we have Romy. Was it Romy? Was that her name?
Yeah.
Romy discovers her daughter fooling around with a girl that isn't her girlfriend. Isabel is probably going to catch on to something going on with her mom.
Yeah.
Now, did that come to pass?
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Then the
it's not as dramatic as you thought.
Yeah. It was be. Then we have the secretary, and immediately I'm like, okay, so we have Romy, we have her secretary Esme, and now we have this dude who's shown up.
The personal assistant.
Yeah. And I was like, that personal assistant is going to find out about the affair and is going to like leverage that or be a threat to Romy at some point.
Yeah.
And that comes to pass. Like, there's a lot of things that come to pass. There's weird things that I actually liked that they did that surprised me. The only problem there was they just never developed it into something interesting after that point.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the hotel.
Yeah.
When we have Romy and her boy toy end up at a hotel room, and that's when they actually get into kind of a direct conversation about, what is it we're even doing? And it's awkward. And getting her to do like, submissive stuff, he doesn't really know what to say. They both are like, is this stupid? It's one of those where you're probably stepping outside yourself and you're going like, oh, this is so cringy what we're doing. And I love the naturalism of that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't feel like it went anywhere with it. It just kind of was like, yeah, they're kind of awkward, but then they kind of get over the awkwardness and it doesn't come back up again.
Yeah.
And then they kind of settle into a routine. He then starts to become a threat. Like he does things like showing up at her house, which felt very 90s erotic thriller with, and you can go, oh, well, it's the same thing, but it's like genders reversed. Okay. But what does it even say about the genders being reversed then? That's different from a 90s thriller.
It just never really feels like there's a threat of sorts, right?
Well, yeah, I didn't know. Is this a drama? Like, it's just a straight drama? Is this a thriller? Because there's moments where it feels like her livelihood's being threatened and she's going to have to deal with this. And then it's just like, no, it's much more like human and grounded. And it felt so tonally off when we compare it to Ryan's previous movie, Bodies, 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 which from scene one set a very specific tone and stuck to that the whole movie.
Yeah.
And it was able to balance this lighthearted humor with like gory violence. So I know the director can like do that sort of tightrope act Here, it just felt like a mess.
I think it probably has to do to the fact that, like, if you're gonna make a film like this and you're going to dip your toes into erotica. I think my problem is having to do is like there is a lot of badly written erotica out there. I've been witness to it.
The 50 Shades effect.
The 50 Shades effects, and like the thing is like they've always been there.
Oh
They're
yeah.
a
But
lot
I
of
think,
times it's like self-published. It's
but I think the success of that book caused a lot of publishers to be very like craven and go just whatever we can publish, whatever we can publish. Yeah.
And I think for something like this to work, there has to be a certain vulnerability about it. And I don't think they went that far. There is this moment where like Romy is like we're seeing her go get Botox injections. She's freezing off her fat. She's doing all these things in order to maintain a certain image. And then later on, she's having family holiday photos taken with her family, in where her daughter Isabel, played by Esther Rose McGregor, is wearing a hoodie, is not wanting to look at the camera.
Her hairstyle is very like, would it be Gen Z or
Like
Gen Alpha?
Adoption of like the 80s being
Is that kind of mullety thing?
Yeah.
And so yeah, her daughter is clearly pushing back against the image that her mother wants to produce.
So and when it comes to like Romy telling her daughter, can you just take off your hoodie or can you look at the camera? Her daughter turns around and it's like, you look like a duck. Like, why do you do this to yourself? It starts making faces. And like to like a moment, it feels like genuine where Nicole Kidman's face is like she drops, like she realizes like I'm doing all these things and I want it to make it look natural, but my daughter knows immediately what I've done to my face.
The people closest to me can see through me.
And it's also sort of like you don't have to, it's like you don't have to say it, but show it. Show it, it just being like her maybe having a conversation with her daughter who's maybe feeling insecure about herself, only for her daughter to lash out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Being like, why the fuck are you telling me that I'm beautiful when what the fuck have you been doing to your face? It's just both of her daughters are supposed to be polar opposites of each other.
But like we don't really get much insight to the younger daughter at all.
No, we don't. So there is
which I did get the sense she might be on the spectrum.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be like, oh, her husband's a director and like feels as if like he's like irrelevant. Maybe his wife thinks so, but it's just a lot of saying and not showing it to me.
When it's also there are some relationships in this movie that are much more interesting than others, and they don't get enough attention. I think the Harris Dickinson's character is the least interesting character in the whole movie.
Yeah,
he is boring. When it came on screen, I just started to feel my brain drifting because it's like he's only there to take part in these like erotic scenes, but there's nothing like, even when it starts to turn sour, he doesn't even become that much more interesting. And he's an actor I've seen in other movies, and like he's caught my attention, like Iron Claw and Triangle of Sadness. But here, and there's like that moment, that vulnerable moment where he's feeling awkward and weird, and I'm like, oh yeah, stay with that. Let's go with that. That's a much more interesting direction to take this movie, because it would go against the expectations of the audience based on marketing. And they just don't really do that.
Yeah, I think it's like this weird thing that it's like they paint him to be like this threat in his life, when at the end he's sort of like, I'm just playing with you. Like
we don't even really know why he starts doing it.
Yeah, and it's also just like this thing of it being like, again, this is not a terrible movie. I'm picking on stuff that's just like they don't make him interesting. There's never like, hey, where did you grow up? Blah blah blah. Like, why are you interested in becoming an intern here? Because he says things to her that's supposed to be contradicting.
Well, it almost feels like he's targeted her from before he even got there. But they don't even like, that would be where the thriller element would come in. But then it just feels like, oh, was this just a random thing he decided to do?
But I think it's just like this weird thing of it being like, even if truly what you wanted to do was talk about women's pleasure and talk about the taboo of her wanting to be submissive to someone, despite of her being like a CEO, a mom that does everything, you're not doing it in a way that feels authentic or in a way that feels like that explains to me that this woman has tried everything to try to get off.
Yeah,
And that
you're
it feels
exactly
like
right.
this empty space in her life because she can't do it and she feels weird. Because what happens is she has those moments with her husband, but let's be honest, if you can't get off, it's not just having a talk with your husband, it's wondering like, why do I like this other thing? What about it? Even though I know it's ridiculous, why is it? Or like, why is it you can't talk about it with your husband?
Because
Because
they introduced that element of her having been in a cult. So you're like, well, then it would seem to me that what you're doing is you're falling back into these bad habits that were indoctrinated into you while you were in a cult.
or just also like this, okay, so like
But I mean, they do kind of resolve that by the end, right? Because like I would say the end of the movie presents a very healthy resolution
yeah,
to this situation.
thing that like so Harrison's character like in Antonio Banderas like are have a talk.
That did not feel very realistic.
The weird thing is like Antonio Banderas is kind of like indicating that like women don't truly want to be submissive.
Well, it almost feels like an anti-feminist movie in a little way.
And it's
Because like that, yeah, that thing of because what he's saying is the kind of thing you might hear. I don't know all the different waves of feminism. Is that second wave?
yeah, probably like first or second wave, which is the thing is like as you know, us as a couple, when we've talked about even like similar stuff about sex, it is what basically she's looking for is a way to turn off her fucking brain and to just live in the pleasure because she can't do it any other way. She wants to be viewed exclusively as something to fuck
Yeah.
at those moments. And when, like, within those moments of pleasure, like, once it's done, she can go back to being Romy. But her husband is like, that's too fucking weird. And it's
Well,
this
she
weird.
also isn't talking to him about it. That's the thing is he is completely unaware until like midway through the movie.
For example, she tells him, like, do it like this. And he's like, no, I have to look at your face. But she's like, just do it like this so I can get off. And he's like, no, 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 I have to look at your face. So it's this weird thing that it's like, so are you telling me like the husband is just straight up just ignoring her?
But he doesn't, yeah, because he doesn't read as that character most of the time.
Which is a thing of just being like, to then have that conversation with the person who's like been your wife's lover to be like, no, women like wanting to be like submissive. That's just like,
it's also two men having a conversation about degrading women.
yeah.
And you're like, this is kind of weird.
Not about that. And like there's the only like, for example, touching or like interesting moments are when Romy and her lover talk about the fact that they both have people. They both have different people, right? And I like the fact that Harrison's character goes, I like who I am with so and so as I like who I am with you. And it's like this understanding that like he gets something from each different person and he doesn't view them as like one better than the other.
But okay, but then that contradicts all these threatening like moves he makes towards her, like showing up at her country house and like meeting her family, where it would be like, I don't think he's played as an idiot. He would know that like what you're doing is a very like threatening move.
What was sent off with her because she left her laptop at work. And that's the weird thing that I think the movie does not want him to be a threat at the end.
But like that thing is, okay, he could drop off the laptop. Why is he sitting at the kitchen table with her family eating breakfast when she shows up, right?
daughters just let him in.
But then, I mean, if I was him, I would go, oh, no, thank you. I have somewhere I need to be. I'm just dropping off the laptop. But the fact that you stay, it's like he's waiting for her to show up so he can kind of like flex.
Yeah.
But then the character is like, but I don't want to hurt you. And so it's just, I don't understand. He's not a character. He's a prop. He's a plot prop.
Problem at the end of the day, because it's like they don't make him interesting. They don't
He
flesh him out.
He doesn't tell her about the relationship he's having with someone close to her, and then shows up at a birthday party at her house with that person. And it's like every movie he's making is a sort of like middle finger to her, like a challenge. But then he's like, oh no, I get different things from different people. These are two different characters, and they've tried to like mash them into this one character.
Part of the problem with it, even though like there are interesting things, they're like, this could have been written in a better way. This could have been written in a way that was far more interesting. You could have written it being like, okay, maybe Nicole Kidman does not know how to explore certain aspects of her like sexuality, and here comes so and so wanting to do like dominant stuff on her, but like it would have been interesting had he been like, when they sat down, had a cup of coffee, and when she's like, how do you know all this stuff? He's like, well, actually, before I ended up going to business, I was studying like sex psychology, and my thesis was blah 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 blah. And like,
but yeah, ultimately his character has no motivation.
There's like no motivation except like
he's bored.
He is a business person, and that's it.
We don't even know like what his aspirations are, why he's an intern at this company.
Yeah.
What does he want to do?
Because
like he's just no.
Yeah, it's also like they brush off very quickly, because at first you think, oh, he must have managed to force his way to become like her mentee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, her personal assistant's like, actually it was so and so that added you to the group of people, and he randomly got you. We just thought it would make you feel like more like this would be more of a family atmosphere, or like that you would be like more of a welcoming person. And then the threat that comes afterwards about when finding about the relationship is very much like, we're going to use this to help other women. And it's kind of just, it's not even a slap on the hand. When it comes to punishments, it's as if someone just put her hands on her laps and just told her, chill out.
It's like they had the stakes and then they sucked all the air out of them at a certain point. And then the movie just kind of like happens for the rest of it.
Yeah.
I do want to say, I don't think an executive is a relatable character in a movie. And that was my biggest problem, was I didn't give a shit about this lady. She could have been a male character. I wouldn't have given a shit. She has so much money and so much stuff. Any problems, she's created them in her life. I don't have any sympathy for her.
It actually like makes it clear.
All right. Well, when we come back, we'll be talking about All We Imagine as Light. Nurse Prabha's daily life in Mumbai takes an unexpected turn when a surprise present arrives from her estranged husband. Her younger roommate, Anu, faces frustration in her quest to secure a private spot in the city to be intimate with her partner. This is All We Imagine Is Light, an Indian film from director Payal Kapadia. I think I pronounced that correctly. Maybe I didn't. It has 3 languages in it, one of which, of course, is Hindi. One of which is Marathi, which I'm not familiar with, but the other one, Malayalam, comes from the ethnic group that the 2 characters belong to. I learned some things. They come from the Malayali culture. They make up the majority of the population in Kerala, India, and they are known to push against caste ideology and have a very communitarian belief system, which I think we kind of see in the movie. So this movie, what a movie. Some of the things, because watching it's a very like chill, lo-fi kind of movie. And I remarked on that when we were watching it. Like, oh, this movie has like a vibe to it.
Slice of life.
I looked at the Google average. It has a 2.8 out of 5.
Okay, please explain.
Letterboxd average is a 3.9 out of 5.
So why the difference?
I'm not exactly sure, but I discovered some interesting behind the scenes information about this movie. I had thought this was India's selection for the Oscars. It's not. And that has created some problems. It's a co-production of France and India. I also saw there was like a Dutch company in there, a Belgian company,
Yeah.
but it's mainly France and India were the financial backers. Neither country submitted it for Oscar contention.
Okay.
The jury in India that makes the selection of what they're going to put up for awards is an all-male body. Uh, However, they described the movie in this way. They felt that they were watching a European film taking place in India. And that was their reasoning why they would not nominate it, because they're like, we don't believe this represents India. We think stylistically and the way the film is shaped, this is a European movie. It doesn't represent the way Indian cinema is made. The director has, because the other film they nominated is a movie that is about women. But I don't know much about it, but it did sound like it was more in the vein of other Indian films, closer to like what people think of culturally when it comes to Indian cinema.
Okay.
The director has expressed that she's happy that there are two Indian films out at once about the complexity of Indian women's lives.
All right.
So she's been taking a very diplomatic approach to it. Uh, However, when we get to the Oscar shortlist of what's actually nominated, India's selection was not chosen to be shortlisted. So India doesn't even have a movie that's up for the award now. It goes knocked off the long list. And the Indian jury also said that they felt the film was very poor technically. So I've given you this information.
Okay.
I want to hear what you think of this, what I've shared with you here.
Is the director's Indian?
Yes.
The editor?
I don't know.
That is such a, I mean, we did remark during the film.
It didn't feel like an Indian movie.
It didn't feel like an Indian movie, especially with the selection of music.
A lot of very like subtle jazz piano, almost like on a YouTube like 5-hour playlist of like lo-fi piano tunes to listen to while you study.
Yes.
Which I liked, because I associate that kind of music with, I kind of listened to that kind of music when I lived in Nashville as an undergrad. And so anytime I see that music paired up with images of like a very dense urban space, it does, like, it's very evocative. It takes me back.
Yeah. I think it's just, it is, I'm not that it's upsetting, it's just sad because the director probably made the movie that she wanted to make, only to be told that she is not following an aesthetic
Essentially, yeah.
that like they would prefer. So it's also the question of watching the other selection of it to see what the differences vary.
Well, and I think what they mean by a European film made in India is it is very similar in tone to like Italian neorealism,
Yes.
where it's about working class people. It doesn't try to make anything fantastic out of their lives. It doesn't have any overly stylish like things. But I also believe, I think I'm correct on this, that a couple years ago, people thought that RRR movie would be nominated. Only totally different than this movie, right? More of what you might expect with India, and a very popular movie even outside of India. Same jury did not vote to put that up in nomination.
Okay.
So it's one of those where I would really feel like it'd be interesting to go through and look at what they have nominated to try to figure out what is it they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the introduction of this movie is interesting because we don't really start off with the voices of the characters. We're hearing what we could say is like a documentary style talks before the film starts
About Mumbai.
which people say if you want to make money, you go to Mumbai. Mumbai is where everybody makes money in India. This is where everybody from small villages come together and live there. And then there's remarks of like, why would you go back to your village if you're in Mumbai? And it feels crowded. It feels sweaty. It feels like,
Well, visually blue, very cold.
yes, much like the images what you would think when somebody mentions New York or any major city.
There's no warmth in the images of Mumbai.
No. And it's also this indication that like not all the jobs would be great jobs to have, but you would find a job, whether it be like hospitality or like trash cleaning. You make do with what you make do with. With that introduction, I thought for a second, like, okay, maybe we're gonna be dealing with like, not that these women weren't poor, but we're just like we're gonna be dealing with people who are out there looking for a job. But it turns out these women are nurses.
Yeah, they're very. It's like Prabha is forced to have a roommate because her husband is absent, and her husband, they get married years ago, and he almost immediately leaves to go to Germany to work, and then she never hears from him until she gets this rice cooker in the mail that isn't even like has a return address that she knows it's him right away. She has to kind of sit on it and think about it for a while. So I would say, and then there's the subplot of the tenants association.
Yeah.
Because they're wanting to demolish the apartment building they live in, the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so all these people that live in the neighborhood are kind of working together to try to push back against this developer. But the film doesn't try to like pretend they're going to defeat them. It is sort of, they are in the face of something larger than them, and they don't have the institutional power to be able to fight it. Yet they're still going to try to do what they can.
Well, I think there was also like this interesting moment where the is it what's the main character? Like the
Prabha.
Okay. So she brings one of the other tenants a card being like, here's the name of a lawyer, go talk to them, which is just, it's part of the tenants to argue. And the woman's like, why would I call him? So it's like it's almost a sense like this movie it's almost like you need to know a little bit about India for me to understand why would that woman not call this lawyer.
Well, and also finding out more about the Malayali culture helped me understand like, oh, so Prabha is not, there may be aspects of her that are more conservative, her worries about Anu and who she's dating, but by the end of the movie, we see her completely push back against that. And that's actually more true to her culture.
Yeah.
But that also happens when they return to their village. They go, and the way the village is shot is very sunny and warm and green. And it is a visual antithesis to what Mumbai looks like in this movie. And it is a movie about there being this pile of expectations put on you and then just kind of eventually shaking them off.
Yeah. I think it's also having to do with the fact that like it's that interesting aspect of when as to probably why it was not selected. It is these maybe to them they're like, oh, you're saying that Mumbai isn't good and that small villages are better, but small villages need development. So I like it's always hard because I think like I've had like been pushing back with this idea with either with Western movies when they kind of go like small towns is where it's at kind of thing, where it's sort of like, okay, maybe the culture is better within those small towns. But they also didn't make it seem like because it felt so slice of life at times, there was only a little bit of like of a sense of why it is that like life in the big city would be not great.
I got the sense that there were, because it's interesting, the film, we'll talk about Anu's character. She is having a relationship with a Muslim man. And I didn't see specifically where it spoke about the Malayali people being Hindu. It did say that like there's traditional dress for men and women, and part of the women's traditional dress is that sari.
Yeah.
So even as a nurse, we see Prabha wearing the sari. However, Anu is from the same culture, dresses more contemporaneously.
Yeah.
Which is an immediate visual contrast between these characters and how they view things. Prabha is very uncomfortable with Anu dating a Muslim man. She's not going around telling anybody about it, but once she realizes what's going on, there's this kind of quiet worry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we kind of figure out it's not because she sees it as improper. She's worried for Anu.
Yeah.
I think she's worried about how Anu might be rejected by his family, how Anu, she's like, I don't see any future for the relationship. And even Prabha, she's married, but people are, when they find out about her husband and how he's not there, they just feel so much pity for her. And I think it's almost that Anu does not, or that Prabha doesn't want Anu to have that same experience.
Although they have there is a difference of experiences.
Oh yeah.
Anu is already getting photographs from her parents about men for an arranged marriage.
Yeah, her parents are sending her stuff.
How she does not want to proceed with the wedding. I think what it's also sort of like, but she wants to live a more modern life because it doesn't seem like with the conversations that she's having with her boyfriend that she's seeking marriage from him.
No. She wants to fuck. That's the main thing. Yeah.
It would make sense if she knows within time eventually she's gonna have to give into an arranged marriage. She wants to at least have the autonomy of figuring out what for her career and at the least sex wise. And it's also the fact that her roommate Prabha, who was an arranged marriage.
And it turned out badly.
And the fact that she's and how she probably kind of tells her yes, it was an arranged marriage. And what's worse, I didn't really get to know him.
Yeah.
He immediately went off to Germany and the conversations start to were frequent until they just faded away.
Well, because it also brings up the question of what is a marriage? What is its purpose? Whenever you have an arranged marriage and then the spouse departs for years and you stop hearing from them, are you really married? It just seems like you had a relationship that then fell apart.
Yeah, and no longer being at the least financially supported. She's having to have a roommate, continue on with career, and also deal with the fact that there are people who show interest in her, but she can't even do anything about it.
There's an interesting sequence where I think Shiaz is the name of the boyfriend. And he tells Anu that his parents are going to be away for a whole day at a wedding.
Yes.
And that's the invitation to come over so that they can have sex. However, he lives in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood to the point that for her to come to his house, she's going to have to wear is it a burqa? Is that the full?
I think he asked her to wear a burqa. Yeah.
And it's the full head to toe thing. She doesn't have to cover her face, but she has to wear the head covering and the full dress. And she goes to a store and buys one and has it on and is on the subway. And then she doesn't say anything, but you can just see it in her face. Something kind of clicks and she gets off the train. And then she takes the thing off and goes home.
Well, she does have a conversation with him on the phone briefly. She tells him that she missed a train, I think.
But I'm talking about internally what was going on with her in that scene. And I think it is a realization of, if these are the hoops I have to jump through, what am I doing? It's that sort of looking in a mirror and just kind of asking yourself, what exactly is it we're doing here? This is insane, the lengths we're going to.
She had a discussion earlier, with Brava about being not being able to afford her side of the rent. And there she is going to buy something to stay in disguise.
In a relationship with a guy whose family will never accept her. That's the implication.
Of acceptance or not, he hasn't made any effort for it.
Yeah, and he's kind of fucking around too.
And there is this interesting thing that these conversations are kind of touched within American cultures when it comes to Indian families, when they do talk about arranged marriages, about how white women tend to. How Indian women have told white women don't date these guys because they're just around to fuck around, because eventually they're gonna have to settle down with whoever it is that the family has said that they have approved of. And it's this interesting thing, like, oh, not only should like Western women be weary, it's like it's happening within their own cultures as well. Of like, yeah, they like each other, they have a few laughs, but when, for example, she shows them the photos of the men that like her parents have shown, and they're making fun of it together.
What I love the way that scene. There's something in here that Cavadia does that's very interesting. How she presents electronic communication.
Yeah.
So like text messages are done in orange text in the middle of the screen with both English and Hindi. I think it's Hindi subtitles. And then that scene you're talking about, we don't know what's going on. We just see some like photos of ridiculous looking men. And we hear Anu talking. And then eventually Shiaz starts chiming in, acting as though he's the men talking in their voices, and they start making fun of them, which was a very relatable thing that we would do, my siblings and I, with like old yearbooks.
Yeah.
Of just making people's voices. And I found like those things very interesting, but I also found those surprising because I don't feel like I've ever seen an Indian film that presented things in that way.
Yeah. Where like the cultures didn't feel that different, but maybe that was the issue with like the selection of the Oscars.
Yeah, it felt like a way. When I looked at it, I thought, oh wow, this culture really isn't that much different than what we see here in Europe or what we see in the United States. This
masculinity, like, oh, the guy mentions pigeon hunting, while we would probably be like, you know,
deer hunting
or pheasant hunting over here. It's, I think like the women end up being very relatable into some degrees and crossing barriers that I feel like the other wouldn't, because Anu gives a woman birth control pills
for free,
does not charge her. After she talks to her about like, hey, if your husband takes a vasectomy, you'll get 900 like rubies. And like I think like a chicken also.
Yeah.
But she's like, oh, but my husband said that would take away his strength. So she just gives her the pills, and the woman's like, should I give you anything? And she's just like shrugs it off.
Well, it feels like Anu is more willing to embrace modernity, and Prabha is frightened. Or even she feels like she has to cling to this thing in her past for most of the movie that is absent.
Yeah, because like there is like an open invitation for her to have a relationship with one of the doctors, because he's kind of like, okay, you're not married, like you're married, but he's not here.
Yeah, it's like, well, you're married on paper, but there's no love. It's not. Yeah.
Nobody would tell you that you're wrong if you try to move on or try to get a divorce. Because it's like that interesting thing that I'm sure there's a system in India that after a few years, if he has not appeared or giving you a fucking dime, then you can consider it divorce. Like, but as we saw with like Happy Hour with like the 7-year thing that they explained.
With Prabha, she's the character who goes through the most dramatic arc.
Yeah.
And is, I would say, more of a central character than Anu. Anu is kind of a foil to her. I do find it interesting that where Anu is finally able to have sex with Shiaz is in the woods in the village.
Yeah.
So they have to leave the city, which you would think of as a place where you would have more opportunities to like get into bed with someone, and return to like nature. And they have sex there. And that's also the same place where Prabha finally kind of has this revelation. What did you think of where that character ended up at the end of the movie? Because she's a very different person at the end of the movie.
Can you refresh my mind on the end of the film?
So they go back to the village, and I'm trying to remember if it was the issue with the company destroying the property they lived on. But she and Anu, and then there's another woman who was already like had gotten her limit.
Yeah.
And she's going back to the village, and they go with her. I think she's the cook. The cook.
Yeah, that she gave the number for the
yeah. And so that's Parvati. She quits her job, moves back to the village, and so they travel with her to help her relocate. So they're not coming back permanently. So Prabha, she rescues the man who was drowning in the water. The village is on the beach, performs CPR, and she kind of ends up in almost a default wife position with him because the woman at the doctor's mistakes her for his wife.
Okay.
And she starts having a conversation with this guy. And in the conversation, we see it through her head. He transforms into a vision of her husband because
Oh,
the actor changes, and for a minute, and because the movie is so subtle. That's the thing, is this movie has such a subtle touch that it doesn't make grand gestures. Things will happen, and you kind of have to be paying attention. And so I was like, why does he look so different? And then I realized in the way she was talking with him, she's talking to her husband in her head, but she's seeing it as something that's happening externally.
yeah.
And he apologizes, really wants her forgiveness. And in her head, she just goes, I don't ever want to see you again. And that's how she resolves that. And so then at the beach shack, that's where she and Parvati are at the end of the movie. And that's when we see Anu and Shiaz show up.
Yeah.
And Prabha behaves in a way completely contradictory to the way she's been the entire rest of the film. And so what do you think was going on there with Prabha? Like, why do you think she came to that moment?
I think it was the ability to finally just let go. Because she was never gonna have a conversation with her husband, like not face to face. He mysteriously like sends her a rice cooker
Without a note or anything.
Note with not a return address, and the only reason that she deciphers it is because like her roommate turns it around and says like made in Germany.
Yeah.
And she sadly embraces this rice cooker.
The scene where she's hugging the rice cooker on the floor and like contorting her body in a really weird way that looks painful.
Like trying to like envelop it in order to substitute for the love or even the affection that she should have received from her husband.
But like it speaks to cowardice, right? Like he thought he could just send her a product and that would like patch things over.
Yeah.
Not even a note or anything.
Because it's not as if he even like left her with a child to raise to explain her solitude. She is alone.
Yeah.
She is
when she kind of embraces the rice cooker like you almost would a baby.
Yes.
Because it's like, what is her life? She's not getting younger. She's still young enough to have a child if she gets married probably in the next few years.
But it's also this like how basically she's done everything that people have wanted her to.
Yeah.
And however
and she's miserable. And I think Anu doesn't do what she's expected to do. And I think that's kind of what the ending is Prabha goes, no, we can't do what our society expects us to do. We have to do what we know is best for ourselves.
Yeah.
I felt like there were some film connections here. I want you to tell me if you could see and where you see it in the film. Wim Wenders. So Alice in the Cities, Paris, Texas, most recently Perfect Days.
Yeah, I could see that with like how quiet the film felt in comparison to what you would have thought, especially at the beginning.
I also think Wong Kar-wai, In the Mood for Love, Chungking Express, Happy Together.
Yeah, the longing.
Yeah, and I think the relationship between Anu and Shiaz reminded me of a relationship you might see in a Wong Kar-wai film, and also the way the city is shot, the way stories are kind of fragmented and we're jumping between narratives. But then when you get to the end, you kind of see how it all comes together, which is a very like Wong Kar-wai thing.
And I love like Anu and like Shaz and how like he's the one that's like finally towards the end being like, well, maybe we can talk to our families to convince them, and she's just kind of like, why?
And then I think because he is kind of a disciple of Wong Kar-wai, Barry Jenkins. So Moonlight, Beale Street, these sort of the way your culture interjects itself into your personal life.
Yeah, and that your culture has certain colors that should be alive on film.
I think that this film was far more relatable and interesting than Babygirl.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with the class status of its protagonist. I cannot relate to a CEO of anything, male or female. It is like, it's in the same way that like when I watch a Shakespeare play, it's hard for me to relate to, the kings. They're the characters that are difficult to relate to. It's the common people, the guards, the servants. Those are the people where you feel the connection to because you know what it is to be beneath someone.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why these women and the complexity of their lives. And I think, especially with that character in Babygirl, so much of her problems are her fault.
Yeah.
She's created her problems. The problems in these women's lives truly are things imposed on them by their culture.
Yeah, it's the problem of being unable to have a safe place to have sex. The problem.
Well, and they don't have the wealth that Romy and Babygirl has to be able to like rent a hotel room to go fuck this dude.
Yeah.
And it's Anu and like Shiaz are like, we have to wait till your parents are out, or my roommate's gone, or we're in the woods of the village where I grew up. And so this is a movie I think that's far more worth someone's time than Babygirl.
Yeah.
I think it is more human and more beautiful.
Yeah, I think Babygirl is just more having to do with the fact of being like, all right, let's see where Nicole Kidman goes this time in an acting part, which is like she did well. It wasn't any like captivating or heartbreaking. It's just this was a far more interesting film.
Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog, you're going to find a lot more reviews. We're currently doing a Shakespeare on Film series. We've got some reviews up there so far, new ones coming this week and for the rest of February. Also, we ask that you contemplate supporting us on Patreon. If you're able to afford giving us some money for that, we really appreciate it, especially right now, going through some laptop repair issues. That is always welcome. We want to thank our patron, Matt, who donates at the writer's room level. When you donate at that level or higher, you get to pick a movie a month for me to watch and review. He's picked a real interesting documentary that a review will be popping up for a little later this month, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. We also have patron-exclusive podcasts on our Patreon. Right now, we've been recording a new series on the Japanese director Ryosuke Hamaguchi. We have previous series where we looked at romantic comedies, did some duo tabletop role-playing, as well as some other things. Our next episode of this podcast, we will be reviewing the Romanian film about the cruel treatment of immigrants, Green Border. That's been a movie I've been wanting to watch for a while and have finally been able to get my hands on it. And what I'm really excited about next week is the latest from British filmmaker Mike Leigh, Hard Truths. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.